Hello, and welcome to celiac.com news. Subscribe to our channel to get the latest celiac disease and gluten-free diet news. And if you have any questions, be sure to join the celiac.com forum online at celiac.com. And now, let's move on to the latest celiac.com news. Gluten contamination common in European oats and gluten-free oat-only products. This study investigates the presence of gluten contamination in two key forms of oats: raw oat seeds and processed oat-only products that are marketed as gluten-free. The aim was to assess whether oats labeled as gluten-free truly meet safety standards, especially for individuals with celiac disease. Researchers analyzed 23 oat varieties registered in Turkey and 15 commercially available oat-only gluten-free products. The oats were tested both during harvest and after being processed for sale. To detect gluten, scientists used a specialized laboratory test called the R5 antibody-based sandwich ELISA method. This technique can measure gluten levels as low as 1 part per million, although only amounts above 5 parts per million are considered reliably detectable. The test identifies gluten contamination from wheat, barley, and rye, 3 grains known to trigger adverse reactions in people with celiac disease. Importantly, the oats used were grown under strict gluten-free protocols, minimizing the chance of contamination during farming and harvesting. The results from the oat seeds were encouraging. All 23 varieties tested had gluten levels below the detectable threshold of 5 parts per million. This indicates that, when cultivated and handled correctly in the field, oats can remain free of gluten contamination. Even varieties grown near wheat fields showed no signs of contamination, suggesting that proper harvesting practices and equipment handling can effectively prevent cross-contact with gluten-containing grains. The study evaluated a mix of regular commercial oats, not labeled gluten-free, and oats labeled as gluten-free under various certifications or processes, for example, purity protocol or mechanical sorting. In contrast, the situation was quite different for processed gluten-free oat-only products. Out of 15 products tested, 11 had gluten levels exceeding 5 parts per million, and 10 of those surpassed the 20 parts per million threshold, which is the legal maximum in many countries for products labeled gluten-free. This means that roughly 2/3 of the products were contaminated with enough gluten to be considered unsafe for individuals with celiac disease. The high contamination rate highlights a significant gap between production and final packaging. Compared to global averages, the oat seeds in this study had a far lower contamination rate. However, the processed oat-only gluten-free products from Turkey were more contaminated than similar products in other countries. For example, global studies have shown contamination rates around 44 to 48% in gluten-free oat products, whereas the Turkish market showed a contamination rate closer to 73%. This elevated rate may stem from a lack of proper testing before products reach store shelves. The study suggests that the journey from field to consumer increases the risk of contamination. While oats can be harvested without gluten contamination, the additional steps of processing, packaging, and transporting them introduce multiple opportunities for contact with gluten-containing grains. This is especially true if the same machinery or storage areas are used for both gluten and non-gluten products without thorough cleaning. One of the major issues identified is the common assumption that oats are inherently gluten-free. While oats themselves do not naturally contain the types of gluten harmful to people with celiac disease, they are often grown, processed, or packaged near wheat, rye, or barley, which do contain gluten. This misconception can lead manufacturers to skip crucial testing steps, thereby placing sensitive consumers at risk. When comparing gluten-free oat-only products with general gluten-free foods and ordinary oat products, the study found that gluten-free oat-only products had the highest contamination rate. For instance, gluten-free foods in general had contamination rates of around 18%, while oat-only products labeled gluten-free had rates nearing 73%. Ordinary oat products, which are not labeled gluten-free, had similar contamination levels to the gluten-free oat products, reinforcing concerns about production standards. The implications of this study are significant for individuals who rely on a strict gluten-free diet, such as those with celiac disease. While oats can be a nutritious part of a gluten-free diet, this study shows that not all oat products marketed as gluten-free are truly safe. The findings stress the need for stricter regulations that require manufacturers to test for gluten before labeling products as gluten-free. Additionally, consumers should look for products that have been certified by trusted gluten-free organizations. The key takeaway from the study is that only oats specifically produced and tested under strict gluten-free standards, like those following the purity protocol, consistently met the gluten-free threshold of less than 20 parts per million, ppm, of gluten. Regular oats and even some mechanically sorted gluten-free oats were frequently contaminated. This study highlights a clear contrast. Oats in their raw form can be free from gluten, but once they enter the processing chain, the risk of contamination rises sharply. The widespread contamination found in gluten-free oat products points to a failure in applying and verifying gluten-free protocols during manufacturing. For consumers with celiac disease, these lapses pose a serious health risk. The study makes a strong case for mandatory gluten testing in all gluten-free labeled products to ensure safety and restore consumer trust. Only with rigorous oversight and verification can oat products genuinely support the health needs of those who must avoid gluten. To get the latest celiac disease news and information, be sure to subscribe to celiac.com news. Thank you for tuning in and see you next time.